There are a lot of tanks at tier 8 that you would call overpowered, but I don't think anyone would disagree with me being that the Caernarvon probably isn't one of them. However, this replay is going to showcase exactly what the Caernarvon can do under the right hands, and of course those hands are Jaeger here, and he is going to be playing the Caernarvon to the highest level and having a great result in accordance with that. So what we're going to see is the Caernarvon in its element, doing what it does best, getting hold down, using the turret armor of the tank, being able to use the kind of decent gun handling, the accuracy, and also the ability to just pump out damage super quickly. And we're seeing that with the 94mm here being able to rip apart opponents. And you can see that the enemy team, there are tier 9s, and so this is not a top tier replay for Jaeger here. However, what he may be able to do is still perform admirably, and what you're seeing here is kind of what you typically expect from the Caernarvon, getting hold down, performing pretty well, being able to tear apart these opponents. And you're seeing here he's locking down the Black Prince, or at least attempting to, coming up against a stock Caernarvon, which I do feel bad about, because that tank, well, this tank is terrible when stock, and I really do mean the Caernarvon is absolutely diabolical. And you can see him just punishing the stock tank, which, you know, it happens on World of Tanks. However, you don't like to see it, at least for the player that's getting torn apart. Now, what you can also see is the Progetto 66 on the enemy team getting simultaneously pumped at the same time. Now, what you see here, the AMX M451, which is not a tank that is particularly very nice to play against in a kind of brawling hold down scenario. However, the AMX M451, the kind of height of the tank, means that it becomes very difficult for him to be able to get fully hold down in this position, which means that you can see that Jaeger is able to just punish him, and because of that height he's able to put rounds into this inner drive wheel, into kind of that flat plate as well at the same time, and be able to perform. Now, the T-34 for some unbeknownst reason decides to push a little bit too aggressively, and he will pay for this. He will seriously pay for this, and you can see here already within the beginning of this that he's taken multiple shots, and you can see that actually Jaeger knows in this game not to go for the Black Prince. He's a little bit less of a threat, and what you're seeing here is the T-34's indecision costing him probably an entire round from Jaeger. Now, this isn't particularly the nicest of scenarios for the Caernarvon, because he's being pushed from multiple flanks. His teammates don't decide to actually come and try and help him out, which, yeah, that's pretty usual in World of Tanks, to be honest with you. You can see that he doesn't really need his teammates, or at least in this sort of sense. And you can see he's pumping out the damage on the Black Prince. The Caernarvon on the enemy team is pushing up the stock one that we talked about earlier, which is terrible, and of course he's able to just continuously do that. And the Caernarvon is kind of tracked out in the open, which is not the scenario that you really like seeing, but nonetheless he's being torn apart. Now, there is the AMX M4 to still deal with, who is on a big chunky amount of hit points, but he's got to be dishing out the damage as soon as he reloads continuously throughout this game if he wants to win, because his team, yes, they are up 4,000 damage, as you can see in the top right. Looks like it's going to be a one-sided victory, but you want the victory to be favoured in your side ultimately on World of Tanks, where you're the one that's actually causing the victory, getting the damage, and of course getting the XP that comes along with that. Now, in a tier 9 game, you can probably expect the Caernarvon to be a fairly mediocre force. It's probably not going to be super overpowered, it's probably not going to be terrible, but it's one of those tanks that only really can play in a hold down scenario, and so yeah, if you get caught out in the open, it can be very painful. Now, luckily that's not happened so far, and that is why he's been able to pick up 6,412 damage within this tier 8 British heavy tank. But he has also managed to block 3,000 damage as well, which is primarily off of the turret of the tank, because we've got a little brief period of time where we can kind of talk about that. And you can see that here the turret armor is actually pretty thick. It's also very well rounded on this upper bit here. There is of course the cupola, which can get penned, and if you talk about the hull armor, yeah, there's not really much point because it doesn't actually get any, and so yeah, it's a little bit disappointing in that regard. So yeah, be very aware if you're deciding to go towards the Caernarvon to expose any of your hull armour, because ultimately, typical British, big lower plate that likes to get set on fire as well, and ammo racked, and yeah, that is ultimately what the Caernarvon's weakest point is, I guess. Now, in this game, what has he got to do now? Well, it's 5-4. The team are up by 2,000 damage, but as we talked about, they were up by 4,000 damage, but it's quickly flipped. And although we say that and then it quickly flips back the other way, but he still picks up the damage on the AMX, which is nice because now it enables him to make some different plays other than what he's been doing all game, where he's been kind of in this hold down scenario where you see a lot of heavy tanks on this map, which is of course the correct play. It's an area that you should be going to in your heavy tank, but it is a common one, and of course we want to see a little bit more interesting content coming out. But having picked up 7,132 damage and pushing forward to try and get some more, you're seeing him use this spot. Now there are a lot of TDs on the enemy team. In fact, 5 of the remaining tanks are TDs, and there is a medium tank, the Leopard PTA, all of which can outspot the Caernarvon because the Caernarvon's a heavy tank and it's pretty big, and it doesn't really have any view range, to be honest, albeit considering it is a heavy tank, it gets okay view range comparatively to some of the other heavies that you'll see, things like the super heavy Germans, the VK 1001P, or any of those sort of tanks. You're definitely going to perform a little bit better, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's still a heavy tank, so he needs to be very careful. He is of course a one shot for pretty much any of those tank destroyers except from the Super Hellcat and the T25-2, so he needs to be a little bit careful of that. The Scorpion G, the Waffle Panzer IV, all of which are horrible tanks to come up against when you're playing in the Caernarvon, because they can even pen your turret, because the cheeks, if you hit at the right angle and with premium ammunition, these high alpha, high penetration rounds from the TDs can actually still pen you, which is of course something that you hate when you're playing a heavy, when you're supposedly supposed to have armor in one position, you play it everything right, and because Wargaming says premium rounds are just a little bit too good, you end up actually being the one that's on the back foot. Now then, in this sort of scenario, doesn't really want to lose that extra shot because he may need it against some of the other tanks, but what he can do is now progress against the Scorpion. Now the Scorpion comes around that corner. That was a very dangerous play there, but he puts a nice round. The Scorpion's basically bust at this point. He definitely went for crap or bust, and he's ended up with the crap end, and of course now he's got to fight against the Waffle Panzer IV and of course this sneaky little Super Hellcat, which we don't actually know where he is at all during this replay so far. Obviously Jaeger actually pops down in the bottom left, Hellcat ? And of course hopefully the team will respond, but it is, of course, World of Tanks, and we don't actually ever really get a response, and you can see that the Caro is replying with negative, so it's always good. But there we go. Now you see him actually progressing towards the Waffle Panzer IV. He wants to get him out of the game, because if he can do that, then that will be perfect. Can he do it? Can he do it? Yes, he can. Of course he can. He has enough hit points to take one shell from the Hellcat, or the Super Hellcat I should say, and he's picked up his 8th kill of the game, and of course 8,048 damage, which if you're playing in any tank in World of Tanks, that would be a very good result, whether you're playing tier 10, but this is of course a tier 8 heavy, and a British one at that, so yeah, very, very good one. 4,000 damage blocked as well, which is always good. 218 assistance, just a kind of a little consolation prize there, but he goes in for the ram at the end of the game, and he manages to do it, and of course secures the victory in this result, coming up against the Super Hellcat, deciding that apparently sitting in this position was the best choice for him. Yeah, didn't end up that well. If you want to check out any more videos or replays in tanks similar to this, then of course check out the left hand side, which showcases the Manticore having an amazing spotting round on Prokhorovka, and how you can have similar sort of Prokhorovka spotting games. And then on the right hand side we have the VK7201K having just an unbelievable round, both in actual damage and block damage as well, so have a look at those, and of course let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of this one, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel to see plenty more gameplays where this came from. See ya, goodbye.